Yes, Jim, and as you said, it continues. It is still happening. The word siege would apply. The police are here in force. Not only the New York City hostage negotiating team, but also the FBI's hostage negotiating team has joined them. So far, there have been negotiations going on now for about 3 hours. We are about a block and a half away from the entrance to the bank. The camera is moving in to show you as close a shot as we can give you. Those negotiations have been ebbing and flowing, as often happens in the matters of these negotiations with hostages and hostage takers. Now, a little while ago, the chief of the New York City Police Department, David Scott, came out and gave us a briefing. At that time, he said all the indications were that the hostages, the 3 people being held hostage inside, were okay, that no harm had come to them. At that point, as of that point, he said that the hostage takers had not made any threats, and he would not go into their demands. In fact, he said that while they were hopeful at one point that things were about to break, and even though it didn't happen at the time, he said what they were discussing at that time was the manner of the hostage takers' surrender. It began around 8:30 this morning when 3 employees, including a security guard, were accosted by the gunmen as they were entering the bank.
Within minutes of them entering the bank, it appears that they entered a portion of the bank that is alarmed and triggered an alarm, which caused the police to respond. And when the police arrived, they met another bank employee who was about to enter the bank, saw that the door was open, and retreated, felt there was something suspicious.
At that moment, Luis Colon, an auxiliary police officer who lives nearby, heard that employee, a woman, screaming as she ran away from the bank.
I was going into Key Food, and I heard the scream. When I turned around, I see her running towards the middle of the street, in the middle of the entrance section. I told her what's going on. She says, there's a guy with guns. So I identified myself. I told her, stay behind the car. I ran into Key Food. I told him, call 911, and I ran back out. There was already squad cars on the scene.
Shortly thereafter, the hostage negotiating team established phone contact and prepared for what they feared might be a long, tedious process of negotiations. Do they sound like they're willing to listen and come out, or does it sound like it's going to be a long one?
Well, it's hard to guess on these situations. We're just beginning the process now. We are talking to them. They seem to be very, very calm, cool, and collected. I would suspect that they know what they're doing.
Okay, but as often happens in these cases, the mood shifts, ebbs and flows with each passing minute. According to the last briefing, periodically they would just hang up when the cops call them, but the line is still open and they are still hopeful. So far they have not released any of the hostages, and so far there appears to have not been any kind of quid pro quo, still allegedly working out the terms of the surrender of what is now said to be 4 gunmen. Reporting live from the scene in Brooklyn, I'm David Diaz. Back to the studio.
Okay, David, and we'll get the latest from you later today. What a day, this story, that hostage standoff at a Chase Manhattan Bank in Park Slope, Brooklyn. We go live now to our David Diaz. David?
Yes, Carol. In fact, you've just been looking at a live picture there of one of the police officers involved in this situation, apparently trying to make some kind of new phone connection. They have a phone connection to the bank. They say that in the recent conversations, periodically the hostage that they've been speaking to, who has only identified himself as Sam, periodically hangs up on them, but they said the line was open. Well, perhaps they're trying to establish another one, or maybe they might have cut the phone lines. We really don't know. The good news is that they continue to talk, apparently, and nothing bad has happened. The hostage negotiators say time is on their side. They're prepared to wait them out and try to convince the 4 gunmen in there that the best course is for them to come out, to give up, and not to hurt anyone. That's the situation here in Brooklyn. I'm David Diaz reporting live. Back to the studio.
David, thank you.
Been all day long.
Gunmen burst into the Chase Manhattan Bank in Park Slope this morning, and they grabbed several people. Ever since, negotiators have been trying to get them to give up. Let's get the latest on it at the scene. Channel 2's David Diaz.
Okay, Carol, well, there is a distinct note of optimism here. Police say that to the best of their knowledge, the 3 hostages remain in good condition. They have not been harmed. They say that the hostage takers have not threatened to take their lives, have not threatened to do anything harmful in any way. You're looking at the picture now moving about a block and a half south of here, which is on 7th and Carroll, 7th Avenue and Carroll, where that branch of the Chase Manhattan Bank is, where the hostage takers, the 4 of them, and their 3 hostages are holed up now, surrounded, of course, by all kinds of police vehicles, sharpshooters, etc. Now, the police say that the hostage takers have indicated their willingness to surrender and have done that repeatedly throughout the day. There has been one sticking point, however, and that has been a most unusual demand.
They want to do it their way.
Which is what, unaccompanied? Is that
get in a van and they'll drive to the precinct.
Is it a van or is it that moving van?
Obviously, it was not a demand that the NYPD was about to grant. Still, over the course of the day, the hostage takers had been repeatedly described by police as calm, cool, and collected. At least the one who was doing all the talking with hostage negotiators. As heavily armed emergency service officers moved about outside the Chase Bank, it sometimes appeared as if something was about to give, but nothing happened. At one point, a camera-equipped robot holding some kind of bag rolled right up to what appeared to be an entrance to the bank, but its package was neither taken nor dropped off.
We're looking for something to eat, and we sent the robot in with a sandwich and hardline communication to better increase our ability to converse with them directly as opposed to being put on hold, et cetera, et cetera. But the robot is still in front of the bank door and no one has come out to get it.
The siege began shortly after 8:30 this morning when 2 women employees and a male security guard were accosted by armed men with hooded faces as they attempted to enter the still unopened bank. The bank employees were forced inside the bank, and that event triggered a silent alarm to police. Soon, a full-scale hostage drama was underway.
We're maintaining dialogue with the individuals inside the bank. Occasionally they'll hang up and we'll reconnect, and we're still trying to negotiate a successful conclusion to this whole incident.
And you have the robot is still outside the bank, still holding the bag that has sandwiches and what the police call hardline communication, which would be a radio kind of a phone that would be direct contact with the hostage takers. This, of course, has been traumatic for this area as it's been shut down for most of the day. And for that side of the story is my colleague, Vic Miles. Vic?
Thank you very much, David. What happened out here was the atmosphere today wound down slowly. People slowly got accustomed to the idea that there had been a robbery, that there were hostages in the bank, and there was the key, the hostages. As soon as people mentioned them, they began to think about more than their own problems.
Obviously, Park Slope wasn't its usual self today. What with the police out in full battle dress and folks not even allowed to populate their own stoops on Carroll Street. This woman, who was out for a breakfast snack, almost came face to face with the tail end of the bungled robbery at Chase Manhattan Bank here.
I was with a group of people on the sidewalk, and they said, you'd better get out of the way, there might be some shooting here.
The helicopter noises, street barricades, cops with heavy weaponry, and not being able to walk accustomed routes through the area angered some residents. And even for those who opened their doors this morning, business was stopped dead.
They put us out of business. They stopped us from selling coffee and bagels. They told us to get out of the store.
Business is dead. Today is gone. It doesn't exist anymore.
Besides the outrage of residents and the anger of businessmen who lost out money-wise today, there are also those around me who thought about the group with the biggest problem of all, the hostages.
I feel sorry for those poor people, I really do. I only hope that they don't hurt them.
I mean, nobody's life should be threatened, and innocent people should be left out of it.
And what about the thoughts of a New Yorker just back home in Brooklyn from out west?
I just came in from Arizona, where there's usually shoot 'em up, bang bang, but I didn't expect it right away here.
You did?
Yeah.
Well, what do you think now?
Well, it's New York, and I love it, no matter what.
Folks in the street are holding steady right now, steady as far as the hostages are concerned. They're concerned, they're worried about them, but they are going about their business. Everything here is normal, but not quite normal. You know that something's going on out here without seeing all the police and all the rest of the stuff that's going on. Back to you in the studio. Thank you.
Okay, Vic, thanks. Of course, we'll be staying with this story, and if there is an end to it before the hour is out, we'll bring that to you live. We'll be returning to the scene at 7th and Carroll throughout the hour.
An almost inconceivable tragedy is taking place in India. Now on our lead story of the day, that hostage situation going on at a Chase Manhattan Bank in Brooklyn, the Park Slope section. You're looking at a live picture where 4 armed men have been holding 3 bank employees hostage. Began at 8:30 this morning. We are being told now that the hostages are coming out. Apparently they have surrendered. David Diaz has been on the scene all day, and let's go to David now for the details. David?
Yes, indeed, Tony. Right now, within the last minute, we've had what appear to be 2 of the gunmen come out. We say appear to be the gunmen. They came out with their hands above their heads, so presumably it would be gunmen rather than hostages. That would still leave 2 two hostage takers, two of the gunmen still inside the bank. And we don't know whether there's been a gradual surrender worked out. All along, the police have been saying that these hostage takers were willing to surrender, that has never been the issue. They've never been making demands for planes or any other kinds of getaway vehicles. They've said all along, according to the cops, they were willing to come out. They had made a demand which seemed kind of strange, at the very least unusual, which is they wanted to have a police van drive up, have them get into the police van, and then the hostage takers actually drive the police van to the precinct. Well, of course, the cops said no good, and so the negotiations and the discussions continued. And these things have a way of suddenly breaking, the way this one appears to. For moments, it seemed that this would just continue to drag on, and then suddenly, you may see more coming out now. Are we looking at the tape? Okay, we're rolling you the tape now of when the first one came out. You see that the police officers had gone out with a shield covering them, and I think there was a second one that followed almost immediately thereafter. There's some more sounds out there, but at the moment, still waiting. We're back live with you now, still waiting for the other two hostage takers, because we're assuming that the first two out were the robbers who were inside. The last word we had from the police was that the hostages themselves, two women, bank employees, and a male security guard for the bank, were okay. Very early this morning, when they first made contact, when the police first made contact with the hostage takers, they did speak briefly to one of the hostages, and then not again until late this afternoon. And that was when they were told that the hostages had been treated well. No one had been harmed. That the hostage takers had expressed an interest in getting out safely and getting everyone out safely. We are keeping that picture live for you, keeping an eye out there to see if we see any more action. Of course, concerned that everyone come out safely and that there be no mix-ups here, because these can be very tense. Here's video now, you see, of what appears to be certainly one of the hostage takers coming out, because this person appears to be in custody, arms behind the back. They are coming out peacefully, no resistance, it would appear. So what the police had been saying all along appears to be the case, that the gunmen were prepared to surrender themselves. So far, it would appear that they have lived up to their word, and it was has been one of these dramas where there was very little, it seems, in the way of quid pro quos. Often these things, the way they play out, it becomes, well, we'll do this much if you give us that much. If you give us food, we'll do this. If you give us cigarettes, we'll do that, and so on.
David?
That hasn't been the case.
David?
Okay. Yes.
David, this is Tony. Let me just clear one thing up. That last picture we saw of an apparent hostage taker, an armed robber coming out, would that make 3 that have come out, or is it 2 that have come out and 2 are believed to still be in there holding the 3 bank employees?
No, I believe that was tape, Tony, of what would have been the second of the hostage takers to come out. I believe that was tape that we were showing you. So by my count still, and I can't see directly, I'm counting on what the camera shows you and me, because at my vantage point at this point, I am blocked by the cameras immediately in front of me. But our camera can show you the shot directly down there. From what we can tell, it's 2 that are out, 2 that remain, as well as the 3 hostages, because there's been no sign of the hostages themselves yet.
David, it's Carol. Just while we're waiting and watching here, there were a couple of conflicting reports about how this began this morning. One was that it was a botched ATM robbery, and the other was that they simply pushed the employees into the bank as they tried to go in. Do you have a clarification on that?
Well, the police say that it was an attempt to go into the bank, not just ATMs, that these guys had guns and had hoods over their heads, and that as the 2 female bank employees and the security guard were opening up the bank, or arriving to open up the bank, they were accosted by the gunmen and then forced into the bank. So it does not appear at this, from what the police have been saying, that it was a botched ATM robbery. There had been several of those, by the way, Carol. You bring that up at this branch and at others along this strip. A local newspaper had done a series of it, some articles. There had been complaints by the community, some community meetings about security at the bank. But from what the police have been telling us, this was not an ATM or automatic teller machine robbery or an attempt that went bad. This evidently was an attempt to rob the bank by accosting the employees who would open the bank in the morning and then getting in, getting the money, and getting out. But that was foiled when they forced those employees in. It triggered a silent alarm, which did not go off at the bank, but it did go off at the precinct and was communicated to police officers in patrol cars nearby, and they responded. That's what we understand was the way the whole thing began. There was a car immediately outside the bank that had no license plate. Police believes it was that car that had brought the gunman there, and that that was the car that they intended to make their getaway. There's also been reports that there was one other gunman, part of the gang, that got away when he saw that things went awry in the beginning. Police have not confirmed that. So far, it appears to be resolving itself peacefully.
All right, Channel 2's David Diaz on the scene in Park Slope, Brooklyn, where he has been all day. And just to recap for you, it is a Chase Manhattan branch bank. There are 2 armed robbers still in that bank, we believe, still holding 3 bank employees. And the police tell us those employees are okay, have not been threatened, have not been harmed. 2 of the armed robbers have come out and surrendered. 2 are still in there. It is obviously a very tense situation, but it appears to be one that the police have under control. And of course, David Diaz will continue to update us when anything happens out there.
And we'll stay with that situation, of course, and we'll...
Now something's happening at the scene of that bank hostage drama in Park Slope, Brooklyn. David Diaz is there. Let's go to him live. David?
Well, Tony, here's what's happened. It appeared that before, when it appeared that 2 of the hostage takers had come out, actually it was only one of them. The one that the police had been talking to, 2 of them, the negotiators had been talking to 2. This one was the one who was using the name Bobby, about 40 years old, a black male. That's all they have on him now. But at first it looked as if 2 had come out. Actually, it was only 1. They're continuing to talk to the other one, the one that they had been talking to most of the day. At this point now, police are not sure whether in fact there were 4 or are 4 or ever were 4 hostage takers inside. They are now conceding the possibility that there were 2 all along, the 2 that they've actually been talking to on the phone. The one they talked to the most, the one who was using the name, often using the name Sam, is the one that remains inside, and if there are other gunmen, then there would be 3 all told. But the hostages remain inside, and the one hostage taker who did come out told police that the hostages are safe, that they are well, that they have not been harmed. He came out unarmed, so if he had a weapon when he went in, obviously then he left it inside the bank. Just a few moments ago, a phalanx of cops behind shields seemed to enter a passageway that leads towards the bank entrance, but we have not seen anything come out since. But you do get the feeling that this thing is winding down, that perhaps the one who has been controlling the hostage takers, the leader as it were, was waiting to see what would happen if one of them came out and whether or not he was immediately set upon or injured by the police. That has not happened. So right now we'll keep you posted as this develops, but this hostage situation seems to be unwinding.
All right, David Diaz live from Park Slope, Brooklyn, as he has been all day, so you can stay right there and be assured that you'll get the latest on this story from David when it happens.
Okay, and coming up in a moment, taking advantage...
Story that is still unfolding at this hour. Robbers who were trying to hold up a bank in Brooklyn have taken some employees hostage. Eric Shawn is in Park Slope, and he has all the details. Eric?
That's right, Lynn. This hostage drama has been going on for about 3.5 hours now, and apparently police are trying to negotiate a surrender. We do know that 3 or 4 gunmen are inside a Chase Bank that is just up the block here on 7th Avenue in Park Slope, Brooklyn. They have been negotiating by telephone with a man named Sam. The police say the hostage takers are calm. They have permitted at least one of the hostages to go to the bathroom, but clearly everyone hopes that this can end calmly and very safely. At 8:30 this morning, this charming, quaint brownstone block of Park Slope, Brooklyn was turned into a dramatic hostage standoff. Just before opening, police say at least 3 or 4 armed men forced their way into this small branch of the Chase Manhattan Bank at the corner of 7th Avenue and Carroll Street, but the bank robbery quickly fell apart. The gunmen, described as black males, took at least 3 people hostage. The hostages were believed to be bank employees, 2 women, and an elderly security guard. It was a tense, quiet morning as emergency service officers used bullhorns to ask the gunmen to pick up the bank telephone. Then the hostage negotiating team finally established contact, apparently talking with the gunmen, and the FBI was on the scene. The street was cleared, nearby stores and a Key Food supermarket evacuated. Police officer Louis Colon, who lives in the neighborhood, said a women employee ran out of the bank screaming.
Key Food, I heard this lady scream. I turned around and she's screaming, "They got guns, they got guns." I ran up to her, identified myself as an officer, and I told her what's going on. She says, "There's guys inside with guns."
The police say the gunman by the name of Sam talks on the telephone, then hangs up. Then the hostage team calls back, and the communication has been intermittent, but they had been apparently trying to negotiate the terms of surrender here. This hostage-taking is very reminiscent of an infamous Brooklyn one of the 1970s. Remember Dog Day afternoon? Well, in that case, ended safely for the hostages, and clearly the police here say that time is on their side, and they hope this will end calmly, too. Live in Park Slope, Brooklyn, I'm Eric Shawn. Back to you, Lynn.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Update on the hostage situation in that Brooklyn bank robbery. Eric?
That's right, Lynn. The hostage situation is going on to 4 hours. 4 gunmen still inside the bank holding 3 hostages, a woman manager, a woman teller, and a security guard. Police a few moments ago had the loudspeaker asking the hostage takers to please pick up the telephone so they can stay in contact with them. So far, nothing new. No one has been injured yet. Police hope to resolve this calmly and safely without any injuries to get the gunman out and the hostage out safely, too. That's it from Park Slope. Lynn, back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric.
Hostage siege had been going on for more than 8 hours. Sharpshooters from the police SWAT team have the bank in Park Slope surrounded. News 4's Jim Paymar is live at the scene. Jim?
Matt, Sue, negotiations continue at this very moment between the police and the alleged armed robbers at the Chase Manhattan Branch Bank here on 7th Avenue in the Park Slope section of Brooklyn. The latest that we have is that the alleged robbers are now talking things over among themselves, and a surrender may soon be imminent. At about 8:30 this morning, 4 people, at least 2 believed armed, attempted to hold up the Chase Manhattan Bank in the Park Slope section of Brooklyn at Carroll and 7th. Apparently, they tried to enter the bank as 3 employees, a male and a female, were getting ready to open the branch. That resulted in the bank alarm going off, and the hostage drama began.
I saw like 4 or 5 patrol cars stop in front of the bank, and they were ready to shoot. They point their gun to the branch.
Hundreds of police from the 78th Precinct responded to the scene, cordoning off about 4 city blocks. A police tactical squad is on the scene. Sharpshooters were positioned on nearby rooftops. The FBI and the NYPD have established contact with the alleged robbers. The police believe they want to surrender.
It sounds as if they are willing to surrender, but the conditions of the surrender and the manner in which they surrender is what the dialogue is. We want them to come out of the bank and follow our instructions.
And they want to do it their way?
They want to do it their way.
Which is what, unaccompanied? Is that what they're trying to do?
You know, get in a van and they'll drive to the precinct.
Is it a van or? As far as we know, the 3 bank employees are okay. No shots have been fired. Police are looking for a peaceful resolution to this hostage drama. The NYPD has confirmed to us just moments ago that they did talk to one of the hostages, a female. She said that everyone is okay. Obviously, things are very tense inside at that bank branch. We have also talked to some neighbors. They say that this bank has been hit 4 times recently, and they say that it's been a target, and the Chase people have not done enough to protect them. Reporting live from Park Slope in Brooklyn, Jim Paymar, News 4 New York.
Jim, thank you.
8:30 this morning, when gunmen stormed the Chase Manhattan Bank in Park Slope and took 3 employees as hostage. Correspondent David Diaz has been on the scene all this day, is live there now with the very latest. David.
Okay, what we're doing, Jim, is waiting, along with the police, the hostage negotiators, waiting to see whether or not the second gunman, at least the second gunman that was talking to the hostage negotiators, comes out. Now, a short while ago, we'll show you some tape when the first of the hostage takers came out. He's described as a 40-year-old black man, as you can see, a little bit burly. He had described himself, given himself the name Bobby when he spoke to the cops, the hostage negotiators, by phone. Eventually, they were able to convince him to come out. Police have been believing there were 4 hostage takers. Now they say there may only be 2, including the man who's been doing most of the talking. There's some footage of some of the storm troops, as it were, of the police department moving behind a shield going into the Chase Bank branch. But we're still waiting to see the second and possibly 3rd or 4th of the gunmen. The hostages have yet to come out. But here's how Chief David Scott explained what had been going on.
All day long we've been in touch with 2 people, basically, we believe. And the individual who just surrendered was one of those disembodied voices who the hostage negotiators were talking to. There's another individual who the hostage negotiators were talking to. We're trying to reestablish the dialogue with that individual and convince him that it's in his best interest to surrender.
The siege began shortly after 8:30 this morning when 2 women employees and a male security guard were accosted by armed men with hooded faces as they attempted to enter the still unopened bank. The bank employees were forced inside the bank, and that event triggered a silent alarm to police. Soon, a full-scale hostage drama was underway.
We're maintaining dialogue with the individuals inside the bank. Occasionally they'll hang up and we'll reconnect, and we're still trying to negotiate a successful conclusion to this whole incident.
But those negotiations at least produced one of the gunmen coming out, as we pointed out earlier. Why did he do it? Well, according to Chief Scott, he was convinced that there had been no one injured so far and that was the way he would have liked to end things, and they convinced him to walk out. There are indications that there are some differences of opinion among the hostage takers, and again, at this point now, we're no longer sure whether there are 4, as had been reported throughout the day, or only 2. If that's the case, then there's only one of them remaining. But again, to repeat the word, the hostages themselves, according to all accounts, are well. They are safe. They have not been mistreated. That's the situation as it is now out here in Brooklyn. I'm David Diaz reporting live. We go back to Jim.
David, thank you. We'll be staying with this story. We'll bring you additional information as the situation warrants.
10 terrifying hours. News 4's Jim Paymar is live at the scene right now where negotiations...
Chuck and Carol, at about 5:15, finally a break in this very, very long hostage drama. Police say that the gunman who entered the bank at about 8:30 this morning gave himself up. Here's how it happened just moments ago.
They got somebody. They got somebody. They got somebody.
A few minutes ago, one of the individuals who was involved in this caper surrendered. We were in conversation with him, the hostage negotiators, and they assured him that he would be treated fairly if he gave up, etc. No one has been hurt thus far, and it was a fairly convincing argument for him to surrender, and he did so. And we're currently, well, because I guess he has a mind of his own, and the other people, if there are others involved, and there's at least one other involved, they have minds of their own.
That was Chief David Scott. He told reporters that while they earlier believed there were 4 alleged hostage takers, they now think that there may be only 2. Now, the only one that they have in custody says his name is Bobby. He told police officers that all the hostages are okay. As to why the other man or men are still holed up, the NYPD hope that he or they come to their senses before someone gets hurt. That's the latest right now from Park Slope in Brooklyn. I'm Jim Paymar reporting live. Back to you in the studio.
Jim, again, how many people are being held hostage? Do we know now?
There are 3 people being held hostage, a female and 2 males. We believe one is a bank manager, one is a security agent, and one is a teller.
All right, Jim, thank you very much.
We're following tonight a bank robbery gone awry in Brooklyn. 3 people grabbed by the thieves are hostage, enduring hours of terror at gunpoint. It began this morning at a Chase Manhattan Bank in the Park Slope section of Brooklyn. Dozens of police surrounded the area, others patrolling overhead by helicopter and taking aim from nearby rooftops. J.D. Dapper has been at the scene all day. He joins us live from Park Slope. Any sign of it ending, J.D.?
Well, Greg, not right now. The standoff continues. It has been ongoing since 8:30 this morning. Inside, 3 hostages held by 4 gunmen. Outside, a battalion of cops and a negotiating team, and so far, no sign of anybody giving an inch. What started as a bank heist has been bungled into a day-long standoff. Police say 4 robbers, at least 2 of whom are armed, are holding 3 hostages, all of them bank employees. Police negotiators have been talking with one of the holdup men all day, but have spoken only briefly to a woman they were told was a hostage.
If in fact that was a hostage and not one of the bank robbers, she was okay.
So you think it's a calm situation in there despite the...
Sounds, from all indications, with the conversation and the background that one is able to discern, it seems like it's relatively calm inside.
The robbery began falling apart just after 8:30 this morning when a passerby heard a scream.
I was walking by and 2 ladies was about to go in the bank. And as they was going in, the guy grabbed one of them. They was already in there. And I heard her scream, so I ran to the little window and I peeked in. And I saw the guys in there with ski masks on.
So we ran across the street for help.
Went to the chemical bank and told the security guard in there. He said, "What you expect me to do?"
At the same time, off-duty cop Luis Colon was walking by the chase.
I didn't see nothing. The only thing I just saw was a lady coming out screaming. I threw her behind the car. And she asked me who I was. I identified myself as an officer.
Did she say anything else?
She just told me that there's 2 guys inside with guns.
Colon called 911 and Warren flagged down a patrol car, but cops were already on the way. The robbers had triggered an alarm minutes earlier. After several hours, police tried to send in some sandwiches using a robotic rover, a paper bag hung out in front on an arm. But the robbers refused, saying they'd find food inside. Now, the sticking point at this point in the negotiations is over how the surrender will go if eventually a surrender does occur. The robbers have apparently asked the police several times today to send a van. They will drive themselves to the precinct. The police say that is not the way these things go. Again, no demands, no threats have been made, and from what the police can tell from the phone conversations they've had and from the lookouts that they have and the places they're able to see into the bank itself, everything appears to be okay in there right now. We're live in Park Slope. J.D. Dapper, Channel 7, Eyewitness News.
Still a tense situation there.
Now on the hostage situation at a bank in the Park Slope section of Brooklyn. Let's go back live now to J.D. Dapper, who's been at the scene all day. J.D.?
Yeah, a couple of minutes ago, two people have come out. They both surrendered, hands up. They're both presumed, they're in cuffs. They're both presumed to be two of the four robbers that were inside this bank at 7th Avenue in Carroll. I'll get out of the way and show you the scene as it looks right now. They came out on this sidewalk that you see. You can see a couple of the officers in blue in their SWAT team jackets, and they are on the sidewalk there. They came out through that door towards us on the sidewalk and then up against the building, hands up. They've been taken away in cuffs to one of the emergency services vans. All day we have heard that these negotiations were going nowhere. The people inside not making demands or threats, but asking instead for a van, and they would drive themselves. They would surrender, but they would drive themselves to the precinct. Police said no go on that. The robot was pulled up in front with an offering of lunch, if you will. That was refused. Finally, two people came out and were met with men with handcuffs. They were put in cuffs, and then the robot has since moved in to the bank itself. It is unclear. There are apparently four robbers. It is unclear whether the other two are still inside. We have not seen them come out and what the condition is. And it is also unclear the condition of the hostages. There are three hostages inside. One of them the bank guard, and two of them female bank employees. We will update you on this as soon as more information becomes available. We're live in Park Slope. J.D. Dapper, Channel 7, Eyewitness News.
All right, J.D., thank you very much.
Good evening. We have a breaking story at this hour. A standoff in Brooklyn between a virtual army of police and four bank robbers appears to be falling apart. The scene unfolds at the Chase Manhattan Bank in Park Slope, Brooklyn. J.D. Dapper is there to join us live. J.D.?
Well, Bill, the situation is this. There were believed to be four would-be robbers inside holding hostages. They are not sure anymore if there are four, but they know there's at least one who has come out. The scene right now is quiet. There are assault teams, police assault teams in place and ready to go in if they need to, but so far everything has been quiet. The standoff has gone on now since 8:30 this morning with four would-be bank robbers holding three hostages and then a break. One of the suspects came out with his hands up. After 9 hours, the tense standoff broke as one of perhaps four would-be hold-up men came out of the bank with his hands up. Seconds later, he was taken away in handcuffs, but the hostages and at least one and perhaps three robbers remain inside the bank.
All day long, we've been in touch with two people, basically, we believe. And the individual who just surrendered was one of those disembodied voices who the hostage negotiators were talking to. There was another individual who the hostage negotiators were talking to. We're trying to reestablish the dialogue with that individual and convince him that it's in his best interest to surrender, as did Bobby, who was concerned about his safety should he surrender, and we'll let him talk to Bobby. Bobby can attest to the fact that he was treated. We'll let him talk to him.
The standoff began just after 8:30 this morning and was discovered by a passerby who heard a scream.
I was walking by, and two ladies was about to go in the bank. And as they was going in, the guy grabbed one of them. They was already in there. And I heard a scream, so I ran to the little window and I peeked in. And I saw the guys in there with ski masks on.
An off-duty cop also saw the commotion and called 911, but police were already on the way. The robbers had tripped a silent alarm.
The only thing I just said was a lady coming out screaming. I threw her behind the car. And she asked me who I was. I identified myself as an officer.
Now, those two witnesses only saw two men with guns, but all along police were told by the people inside that there were four armed gunmen. Whether that is the case or not, they do not know now. There's a man named Bobby that you heard the chief mention. They don't know if that's his real name. There were several names given during the situation. Again, the situation now, at least one man remains inside holding three hostages, but there may be as many as three. They're a little less clear now than they were earlier before this one hostage taker came out. We are live in Park Slope. J.D. Dapper, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
J.D., thank you.
Check back with you later. Corianne?
And John, now we have some good news to report to you. The good news comes from Park Slope. That's out in Brooklyn. A hostage drama that went on the entire day at a bank finally tonight is over. Eric Shawn has the entire story. He's been there all day. He also has some exclusive photos for you. Eric?
That's right, Cora, and it was a frightening hostage drama that lasted all day, but tonight, finally, it thankfully is over, and the alleged bank robbers and hostage takers themselves are now in custody, police custody. They're identified as Bobby Goodwin and Chris Watts. Police say they held them at bay for almost 12 hours in a Chase Manhattan Bank branch here in Park Slope, but thankfully, this ended peacefully. Street, taking 3 employees hostage after their bank robbery fell apart. The getaway driver apparently fled in fear when the bank alarm was tripped and a woman teller ran screaming into the street.
I heard this lady scream. I turned around and she's screaming, "They got guns, they got guns." I ran up to her, I identified myself as an officer, and I told her what's going on. She says, "There's guys inside with guns."
An army of police descended on the quaint Park Slope corner. Emergency service cops carefully inched their way behind steel shields with their guns drawn, while sharpshooters were poised and ready on nearby rooftops. The scene was quiet but tense as hostage negotiators used a bullhorn to try and talk to the gunman.
Billy, we're on the same team.
Finally, there was contact on the telephone with a man who called himself Sam. He revealed that 3 people were held, locked and tied up in a bank bathroom. 2 women, the manager and a teller, and an older man who was the security guard. The hostage takers had only one demand: to drive away in a van and then promise to meet police at the nearby precinct. Hours passed. Another gunman who called himself Bob repeatedly talked on the phone and hung up. So went the frustrating pattern all afternoon, until suddenly at 5:20, Bob emerged from the bank in handcuffs. Sources tell us he was afraid of his partner, who remained behind. The final break came at 7:35, 2 hours later, when the 2 women hostages were released. Then the guard came out, and at 8 o'clock, the gunman, identified as 32-year-old Chris Watts, apparently sensed no way out, surrendered. He walked out, surrounded by police, who then pulled off his sweatshirt and put him under arrest. It was an end to an exhausting ordeal, another victory for the NYPD. What persuaded the gunman finally to come out?
I think it was excellent hostage negotiating by the hostage negotiators, who gave plausible reasons why they should come out, and ultimately they did.
Initially, they wanted a vehicle so they could take the hostages and flee from the scene, and then they promised that they would release them. We felt that just over time that we would be able to negotiate the release of the hostages.
Well, tonight, that's exactly what happened. The police are obviously savoring their triumph in that there was no loss of life. 2 of the women hostages, however, were roughed up a bit. One woman was punched in the face, the other was hit in the head, but they are doing fine. They have been treated. All have been released. And for many people here in Park Slope, now that 7th Avenue is opened, they're reminded of another infamous Brooklyn bank hostage ordeal of about 20 years ago. Remember Dog Day afternoon? That ended peacefully, too. Reporting live from Brooklyn, I'm Eric Shawn. John and Coran, back to you.
Thank you very much, Eric.
Siege at a Brooklyn bank.
It ended tonight almost 12 hours after it began. Would-be bandits held bank employees hostage all day. Channel 2's David Diaz has been at the scene all day, and he's there in Park Slope now with details. David?
Yes, Tony, and it was really just a bank job that went bad, and then it turned into a hostage crisis that dragged on for almost half a day. And at first it seemed as if it might be solved rather quickly, but then it got snagged, the negotiations did, on demands of the gunmen that they wanted a police van for them to drive away from the scene. Of course, that was not about to happen. And then later on, it got further complicated because the negotiators were never quite sure just how many gunmen there really were. If you've ever wondered what it felt like or looked like to be a hostage being released, take a look at these pictures. Earlier today, as police brought in everything and everyone they thought they might need, the surrounded gunmen repeatedly told police negotiators they intended to surrender. Not once threatened the safety of the 3 hostages, 2 women and a man they'd accosted as they opened the small Chase Bank this morning. But what the first officer who responded saw was enough to raise questions about those intentions.
As I looked in through the side window, I observed a male with a hood on, and he was holding a female and a male with duct tape around their eyes, and he was holding them down.
And indeed, when 2 frightened and traumatized female hostages were finally freed, they had been bloodied by their captors.
One of the women was struck by an object, and the other one was punched in the nose.
Throughout the course of the ensuing siege, hostage negotiators stress what had not happened as an incentive for the gunmen to give up. Shortly after 5, one of them accepted their reasoning and surrendered. But how many were still left inside? All day long, police had been dealing with the possibility there were as many as 4 armed robbers inside the bank. It turned out there'd been only 2. A third alleged member of the team fled in the getaway vehicle, but was later captured. And finally, the holdout among them gave up. And after it was all over, the negotiators conceded that the whole issue as to how many of the gunmen there were was a problem all along.
We weren't sure if we were dealing with 4 or 2. We had changes of personalities. Sometimes we didn't know who we were talking to. They wouldn't identify themselves, so we couldn't be sure if we were talking to the same person every time.
Okay, well, police sources tell Channel 2 News that the getaway van, or the alleged getaway van, has been traced to a relative of one of the gunmen in this case. That relative said to be a worker for one of the armored car companies that services this Chase Manhattan Bank. As for the 2 women who'd been injured, the 2 hostages who'd been injured, they are said to not have been seriously injured. They're going to be okay. And you have to wonder tonight, as the Mullen Commission goes into the worst things that the New York City Police Department does in this town, this represents perhaps the best thing they do, which is negotiate hostage crises without people getting killed. Reporting live in Brooklyn, I'm David Diaz. We go back to the studio.
David Diaz, thank you for a long day's work. Well done.
Evening, a day-long hostage standoff is finally over tonight in Brooklyn. Swarms of policemen lined the streets and sharpshooters waited on rooftops after robbers took over a bank. Reg Wells is standing by live with the latest. Reg?
Brenda, we're in Park Slope. This is the bank across the street. You can see policemen standing guard. The street has been reopened in the last 15 minutes to traffic for the first time since 8:30 this morning. This was a very long, very tense hostage drama.
30 tonight. 2 female hostages and 1 male security guard were released. Then one of the gunmen. The first gunman had surrendered 3 hours earlier.
The first fella out said that he told his cohort that he was going to come out, and the guy told him, don't do that. But he ultimately did anyway.
The standoff began around 8:30 this morning before the bank opened. 2 gunmen stormed a branch office of the Chase Manhattan Bank in Brooklyn. They took employees hostage, but in the process tripped an alarm.
I was going into Key Food, and I heard the scream. When I turned around, I see her running towards the middle of the street, in the middle of the intersection. I told her what's going on. She says, there's a guy with guns.
We surrounded the bank, and as I looked in through the side window, I observed a male with a hood on, and he was holding a female and a male with duct tape around their eyes, and he was holding them down.
A third hostage was eventually taken, and a virtual army of police arrived. Police robots were also on the scene.
The hostage negotiators are trained to put in place those mechanisms in which they've been trained for to try to get these people out as healthy as they possibly can, which they did.
Hostage negotiators set up operations in a bagel shop across the street. This bank's automatic teller machine was robbed 4 times this summer, something that caused concern to area residents.
Every time I go there, I always wind up wearing a bulletproof vest because that bank is robbed more than anything else.
So an attempted bank robbery that was very badly bungled. It's all over right now, and this neighborhood is coming back to somewhat close to normal. Brenda?
Okay, thanks, Reg. At least 12 hours as hostages were held inside a Brooklyn bank.
Well, the siege began about 8:30 this morning, and an anxious neighborhood waited all day. Tonight, 3 alleged robbers are in custody, and News 4's Jim Paymar waited out this standoff.
The 11-hour siege ended tonight just before 8 p.m. when 2 female bank employees and a security guard were released from the Chase Manhattan Bank, and a second alleged gunman gave himself up to police. It all began at 8:30 this morning when 2 alleged armed gunmen confronted 3 Chase Manhattan Bank employees who were getting ready to open the bank.
All of a sudden, I just see police all running around. It's about 8:30 in the morning, and the SWAT team came, and someone broke into the bank. Of course, they brought in the people from the bank with them as they opened up the door.
The gunman apparently tripped an alarm going inside the bank. Officer Enrique Rivera was the first on the scene.
As I looked in through the side window, I observed a male with a hood on, and he was holding a female and a male with duct tape around their eyes, and he was holding them down.
Hundreds of police converged on the bank, and 4 city blocks were cordoned off all day. Negotiations between the NYPD and the FBI to convince the gunman to surrender without violence was successful. At 5:15, one of the gunmen finally gave himself up.
He got somebody. They got somebody.
One of the women who was struck by an object, and the other one was punched in the nose.
After the 2 injured female bank employees were released, the second gunman was brought from the bank and the hostage drama ended. The 2 alleged gunmen, Chris Watts and Bobby Goodman, were escorted out of a neighboring bank tonight, and a third man, Nathaniel Goodwin, believed to be the getaway driver, was later arrested. So after 11 long hours, it is finally over. The suspects have been brought to FBI headquarters in Manhattan. Tomorrow they'll face a number of charges, including assault, attempted robbery, unlawful imprisonment, and federal bank robbery charges. Jim Paymar, News 4, Brooklyn.
2 bank robbers, a third one apparently chickened out and never went inside. He's still at large tonight, but the other 2 are under arrest. One of them has been identified as 32-year-old Chris Watt of Brooklyn. The other one uses several different names. But most importantly, the 3 bank employees who were held against their will, imprisoned inside all day long, are alive, beaten and tied with duct tape, but they are alive. It is a morning few in Park Slope will ever forget. Sirens shriek. Police, FBI, and skilled marksmen with high-powered weapons march through the streets. Search helicopters buzz above. Panicking neighbors near the bank are evacuated. 12 square blocks of Brooklyn are cordoned off. It is no longer a neighborhood. It is a battlefield. The long standoff begins.
Could you tell me if the guard is all right? I love that guard that's in there.
But the security guard's fate, a teller and bank manager, is very much up in the air. All 3 taken hostage by 2 bold armed robbers. Other bank employees are saved a similar fate because on this day, they come to work late.
One thing I just said was a lady coming out screaming. I threw her behind the car. And she asked me who I was. I identified myself as an officer.
Neighbors here have been up in arms for some time with this Chase Manhattan branch bank. There have been at least 4 other robberies here over the past couple of months. That's the reason why the security guard was hired. The same guard who was not able to stop this, the same guard who's now being held hostage. For the next 9 hours, hostage negotiators desperately tried to convince the robbers to release the hostages and give themselves up. A hero sandwich is sent in by police robot, but the robbers and hostages are too afraid to take it. The stalemate seems to be over a demand that the gunman be allowed to drive away in a police van.
They seem as if they want to surrender. They want assurances of their safety.
After 9 hours of on-again, off-again talk, the first bank robber caves in and gives himself up against the advice of his partner in crime. Hours later, one by one, the hostages are released. Here, police realize for the first time that despite the calm voices on the phone, these 2 gunmen are violent men who think nothing of beating innocent women to prove they mean business.
One was struck, and there was caked blood on her face when we got her out of there, and she indicated that she was struck in the head with something.
Finally, the second gunman gives up. Police throw him to the ground, making sure he has no weapons, and then wrestle him to a waiting police vehicle. From start to finish, it is 12 hours of touch and go, life and death. This incident is very similar to a Al Pacino motion picture called Dog Day Afternoon, and that was based on a real-life bank robbery hostage incident in Flatbush, Brooklyn, not far from here. That was a 14-hour standoff. This total is about a 12-hour standoff, and once again, the situation, the hostages, 2 of the hostages were beaten and injured, but not seriously injured, and the 2 bank robbers are now under arrest. The third one, who apparently chickened out and never really completed the bank robbery, he is still at large tonight, and police are searching for him. That's the situation now. I'm Ed Miller. Back to you, Jack.
Ed, thanks very much. A desk story tonight. The hours of terror are over for 3 bank employees held hostage after a failed bank robbery in Brooklyn. The nearly 11-hour standoff with police ended about 8 o'clock this evening, and the suspects are now under arrest. It all began this morning at a Chase Manhattan Bank branch in Park Slope. Jada Dapper has the story.
When a woman came through the door of the Chase Bank in Park Slope tonight, it was the beginning of the end of a day-long standoff between police and 2 would-be robbers holding 3 bank employees hostage.
and two ladies was about to go in the bank. As they was going in, the guy grabbed one of them. They was already in there, and I heard her scream. So
a passerby flagged down Enrique Rivera, who looked inside and saw two employees already in trouble.
The perpetrator was holding them from behind, and they had duct tape, the silver duct tape around their eyes, and he was holding them from behind. But I didn't see if he was if he had a weapon.
Negotiations went on all day, police thinking they were dealing with 4 gunmen.
The problem we had was we weren't sure exactly who we were dealing with. The number that we had was different from what we actually found out. We weren't sure if we were dealing with 4 or 2. We had changes of personalities. Sometimes we didn't know who we were talking to. They wouldn't identify themselves, so we couldn't be sure if we were talking to the same person every time.
About 5:30, the first suspect surrendered, but the second held out, finally releasing 2 female hostages before coming out himself. Police then discovered both women had been beaten.
One was struck with an object in the head. She has a hematoma, as I've been told by EMS, and the other one was struck with a fist in the nose.
Bobby Goodwin and Chris Watts were both arrested by the FBI, along with a third man who returned to the scene and gave himself up. He was the getaway driver. While 10.5 hours may have seemed like a long time for the tactical units crouched outside this door, negotiators said that time was on their side, and the longer the negotiations went, the better off they were. In Park Slope, J.D. Dapper, Channel 7, Eyewitness News.
The 2 women hostages are treated tonight at Long Island College Hospital for their minor injuries.
Chase Manhattan Bank in Park Slope, Brooklyn is closed for a second day today after yesterday's all-day standoff with armed men who took 3 workers hostage. The incident ended without any major injuries yesterday, and David Diaz, who was there all day yesterday, is outside the bank again for us today with more on how the police were able to end this successfully. David?
Yes, Tony, and for the people who use this particular branch, well, yesterday's hostage drama is just a lingering inconvenience. But for the 3 people who were held inside at gunpoint, it was, of course, a harrowing experience that they were lucky to have survived without any serious injury. For that, they can thank their lucky stars and the negotiating skill of the hostage negotiators who unraveled that dangerous knot. Although the gunmen never threatened to harm the hostages, a violent and tragic ending was always a possibility. Among those whose direct job it was to make sure that did not happen were hostage negotiators Joseph Pirano and Dominic Messino. On their side, superior force, negotiating skills, and all the time they needed. On the gunmen's side, 2 women and a man they were holding hostage at gunpoint. Detective Sergeant Joseph Pirano made the first call into the bank.
The person that picked up the line identified himself as the security guard. And he said, I have a gun to my head. I'm not doing very well right now. I said, put the person on the phone that has the gun to your head and I'll talk to him.
The good news was that the hostage takers said they wanted to surrender. The bad news was that they didn't. They were demanding a police van in which to escape. And the negotiators weren't sure how many gunmen they were dealing with. For one thing, the voices on the other end of the phone kept changing. The gunmen were sure the cops didn't know who they were. But by the time Detective Dominic Messino had taken over the negotiations, he knew the name of the voice that had done most of the talking.
I said, look, we know who you are. This is who you are. This is who your family is. This. And I went down the line with him. It took him back for a minute. We could hear it on the phone. He was taken back. And then I made it real clear to him. I said, look, you know, if you think there's a possibility of you escaping, getting away, just forget it.
The negotiators believed that was the turning point. And another was when the other gunman, identified as Bobby Goodwin, decided to give up. A few hours later, the remaining robber, Chris Watts, released the first hostage, teller Carol Rivera, followed by bank manager Wendy Scarlett. Then Watts himself, leaving security guard Wilfred Norman still inside. Well, yesterday's hostage drama marked an anniversary of sorts, for it was 20 years ago that a new unit of the New York City Police Department, the hostage negotiating team, had its first activity. And that was the incident in Brooklyn. A bank robbery went bad that turned into a hostage crisis that became the movie Dog Day Afternoon. In the 20 years since, it's been a remarkable history, one of the most remarkable of any police unit anywhere at any time. David Diaz reporting live from Brooklyn. Back to the studio.
Okay, David. Thank you.
Well, gunmen arrested in that hostage siege at a Brooklyn bank remain behind bars tonight, facing a variety of charges: robbery, assault, unlawful imprisonment. As News 4's Jim Paymar tells us, this latest robbery attempt has area residents clamoring for more protection.
The Chase Manhattan Bank in Brooklyn's Park Slope is closed again today. Police detectives and Chase security agents are combing the scene for additional evidence in yesterday's 11-hour hostage drama.
They got somebody. They got somebody.
The siege finally ended peacefully last night when FBI and NYPD negotiators talked the two alleged gunmen, Chris Watts and Bobby Goodwin, both from New York City, into surrendering and releasing the 3 hostages they'd held throughout the day. This is not the first time there's been trouble at this bank. It's been robbed at least 3 times in the past 2 years, and a number of people have been held up at the ATM up the street.
Somebody grabbed me from behind and choked me, and then there were 2 of them. One put their hands in my pockets and took the money that I had, took my wallet, and I practically blacked out. But their attitude was, we have no problems. This is the safest bank that we have.
While no one was seriously injured last night, area residents are nervous about the spate of crimes in their midst.
I mean, it'd be nice if they had some security guard there, or at least surveillance cameras.
Chase officials say they're aware of the security problems at this branch, and they're doing their best to ensure the public safety. But people in this neighborhood say much more needs to be done. Jim Paymar, News 4, Brooklyn.
A man who runs a messenger service may have been the mastermind of that bank robbery in Brooklyn. Not a very bright mastermind. 3 people were held hostage for 12 hours before the robbers gave up. The hostage negotiating team really came through. As Eric Sean reports, that team was created 20 years ago after another crime that Hollywood glamorized.
Dog day afternoon. What else? You know, it was very intense.
Nobody move! Get over there! The movie immortalized a legendary bank hostage drama 21 years ago. The takeover of another Brooklyn Chase bank when John Wojtowicz, played in the film by Al Pacino, tried to steal money for a sex change operation for his lover. Wojtowicz, who told me he is now a conservative Republican, spent 7 years in prison. But it was his case that, in part, helped create the police department's hostage negotiating team that guided yesterday's drama to a successful close.
It ended quickly after 12 hours. You know, that's sort of like you're hanging on the ledge all day, but you drop fast, you know.
Police Detective Dominic Messino and Joseph Pereno led the grueling negotiations with the accused gunman, Bobby Goodwin, and the alleged mastermind, Chris Watts, who police say operated a messenger service for Chase and burned $130,000 of $300,000 he was trying to steal.
Our credibility is important. We don't lie. And one of those reasons is we want to establish some truths. And the most important truth is that we want everyone to come out safe.
This is how Pereno does it.
Billy, I'm going to guarantee your safety and everyone's safety in there. Our original plan can work. I'm here right with you. We're all here for you, Billy. We're all on the same team. Everybody out here wants you to be safe. Everybody wants you to come out of there. We all want to go home.
We went to the mailboxes, and I waved the bullhorn at them, and that became another bonding. It also became a good faith gesture. Hey, Billy, we're here. This is me. I'm Joey. You know what I look like. I can't see you. But we made at least a good faith gesture to him.
I think many times they'd rather talk to us. They understand that when we tell them something, it's legitimate. That's what we do. At the end of it, we're all packing our stuff up, and we could say, you know, yeah, that was great. It was really a good one. Everything went real well. But you can never say that till it's over.
They savor their triumph until the next call. I'm Eric Sean, Fox News.
Announcement tonight concerning that botched robbery that resulted in yesterday's day-long siege at that Brooklyn bank. The FBI says the alleged mastermind actually ran a messenger service for the bank. Police say 32-year-old Christopher Watts got a key through his job and entered the Chase Manhattan Bank in Park Slope before it opened. Police say when 3 workers arrived, Watts and another gunman took them hostage. The 12-hour standoff with police ended peacefully when the 2 suspects surrendered. But tonight, police also revealed that during the ordeal, the men set fire to more than $100,000 in cash.
The special commission investigating New York police
standoff at a Brooklyn bank faced arraignment today. 3 men are facing bank robbery and kidnapping charges. They allegedly burst into a Park Slope bank yesterday morning and took hostages. The standoff lasted 12 hours before police talked the men into surrendering.
Behind yesterday's botched bank robbery and hostage standoff in Brooklyn and Park Slope actually had a key to the bank. 32-year-old Christopher Watts, seen here surrendering 9 hours into the siege, runs a messenger service. His company had a key to the bank's front door. The FBI says Watts and his cohort, 43-year-old Robert Goodwin, entered the bank before anyone arrived for work. But the plan soon went awry, touching off a tense 12-hour standoff during which the pair allegedly burned up $130,000 in cash. The alleged getaway driver was later arrested. Heidi?
SWAT team surrounded a bank in Park Slope, Brooklyn yesterday. Inside, 2 gunmen and 3 hostages. The standoff went on for nearly 12 hours. The gunmen asked for a van to drive to a local precinct and surrender. Police negotiators said no.
And incidentally, when they wanted that, I told one of the hostage takers that we essentially brought the precinct to the bank. He wouldn't have to travel through the streets. The 7-8 precinct was right here in front of the bank. If you wanted to turn yourself in, it's right here.
Both gunmen later gave up without a shot being fired. The 3 hostages